So I'm curious what the most important things are that you've been thinking about and really concerning your thoughts about when it comes to changing the tide. We're dealing with a technology flood, and the tide is coming in and sweeping us all along. And you and I are two individuals who have for a long time been watching this, feeling this, experiencing this, and we want to change the tide, turn it uh, onto a different course. So when you just think about that big picture, what are some of the things you've been thinking about?
Well, I think if we're looking at trend shifting, we want to shift a trend toward people being more observant of how much they're using screens and actually start valuing more healthy activities and kind of like dissing each other if you're on your screens. If we want to like look at that shift, I think we have to look at sort of what's blocking that shift. Like what are the limiting factors from making that shift. And just to be perfectly honest, I think a lot of the problems in screen overuse of children and teens are the parents and the teachers that are in their lives. I'm seeing a lot of overuse by parents and teachers and addictions and parents and teachers. And so I truly espouse to the whole role model, social modeling that parents and teachers do. Like kids look to the parents and teachers as their leaders, as their parents and teachers, and they will follow down the path. So for years, I've been focused on educating parents and teachers because I felt like with the education that then they would have the knowledge in order to make the changes that they need to make in their
make healthier choices.
Yes, in homes and classrooms. But I'm pretty concerned right now because I don't see that happening. Quite devastated, actually. Very concerned. I see kids not doing well, and I see adults not really, I wouldn't say not caring. I think every parent I've ever met cares for their child immensely, but I don't see the parents and the teachers in this world making choices to create safety and health and well-being in children. For some reason, they're disabled, like in some way, right?
Yeah, in some of the conversations you and I have been having, it seems like with some of your trainings that you're doing in the schools, children are going to end up in a position perhaps of influencing their parents to make healthier choices. And, that's a kind of an odd place for children to be in, an odd role for children. They're looking to adults to lead the way and show them the right way, and here they're sort of having to do that. And I think in some ways children are having to do that in many realms, like environmental concerns. I think it's young people, including even elementary age kids and teenagers are leading the way.
Greta Thunberg
is a perfect example of that. And so it's sort of like the adult world is so off kilter, off track in a lot of ways that children, if given the right information, might be the influencers over their parents.
So as a psychologist, I'm so curious, like, can you tell me, you're bang on. I really feel like the children and youth are our future, and they are going to change this future. But what would be like a downside of that? What from a psychology perspective, like what Is that asking too much of children and youth?
I think in some ways it is, because I mean, it's empowering for youth to, and maybe self-esteem building. But the reality is that they are trying to figure life out. And it's really helpful when you've got healthy adults showing you how to be in the world as a man, as a woman, in a healthy way. And if you don't have those role models, you're sort of trying to figure it out with you're to some extent flailing to figure it out. So it would be much better if parents and teachers would step forward, learn what they need to learn, make the choices that they can make to put technology in its proper place in their lives, and be leaders in their families and their schools. It would relieve children of having of that
Pressure.
burden.
Yeah.
So I'm still hopeful that parents and teachers will cotton on to that and do the right thing, and not sort of force children into a role that I think is a great burden for
Yes.
children,
Yes.
for a child.
So tell me again, from a psychologist perspective, when we're looking at adults with addictions, so we're talking predominantly about parents and teachers, but also clinicians, and what is just tell me a little bit more about what that would be like. I don't have an addiction to screens, so what would it be like to be a parent or a teacher having an addiction to a screen, and then trying to also be a role model for their children and their students?
Yeah, I mean, the two things are contradictory. Being a healthy role model when you're an addict, those things don't go together. So you need to deal with your addiction. And I like the World Health Organization's definition of gaming disorder, because they list the three things that apply to all addictions. And number one is you're out of control. Number two, it takes priority increasingly over the rest of life. And number three is that because of that, there are negative consequences. And yet the addict keeps using in spite of the negative consequences. So when it comes to parents and teachers, who I think often have no idea that they are actually addicted, but if they can test themselves, they might soon discover that they are not really in control. And sometimes when people recognize when their addiction is mild enough, they might be able to wrest that control back for themselves. If they say, okay, we're going to go for the weekend, family, and no screens for the weekend, because we want to test and see if we can do it. If they discover they can do it, well, yay. That means they are still in control. And if they discover they can't do it, it means they're not in control. But that knowledge can help them to seek some help to get back in control. Or, then from there, they'll have to make choices about what they're going to do about the fact that they realize they're not in control. Mm-hmm. And how that might look.
Because I know we've discussed this before. Like, what I do as part of my tech talks for kids in classrooms is I give them this challenge. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to go 24 hours without any screens. And then we plan, so from 3:00 today to 3:00 tomorrow, you're going to go screen free. And then we work really hard for the kids to come up with at least 5 things that they can do, non-screen activities they can do when they get home immediately. So go outside, and what are you going to do outside? You're going to ride your bike, you're going to shoot some bees, you're going to, go for a walk with the dog or whatever. So when the kids, usually when I give the unplugged challenge to a classroom, I go back the next day and just see how they did. Because usually I'm in the school all week. And it just breaks my heart. I have many kids, little kids, telling me that their parents actually had a huge issue with this, and that their parents were upset that the kids were actually trying to put down the phone and not participate in, sitting in front of the screen and eating dinner, for instance, right? And so, and many times these kids are in tears because they actually accepted the challenge. They put their hand up. They were ready to go. And yet it was the parents' own uncomfortableness with this challenge that stopped them from completing, the challenge. So what, tell me your thoughts on that.
My thought about that is that this is when I look to the role model of South Korea. South Korea took a really comprehensive approach to the problem of internet addiction. And they started off by recognizing it as a legitimate disorder. So there was no denial about it being a legitimate disorder. They engaged in an ongoing, huge public education campaign to get the word out about this being a disorder and what to do about it. And part of their campaign was to create softbound books, age-appropriate softbound books, which went to every student, every teacher, every counselor, and every parent.
Wow.
And it was full of information about healthy versus unhealthy internet use, what to do if they identified that there was a problem, and so forth. In addition to that, they screened kids in schools for internet addiction. And if kids meet criteria, then they are sent at government expense to one of 17 treatment facilities where the kids are away from screens. They do a detox. I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 weeks, but they do a detox. And then after the detox, they receive family and individual counseling for months, whatever time is necessary. And that is not, the family contributes what the family can contribute financially to that, but it is a government-sponsored program.
Wow.
And that level of that kind of approach sounds really, really good to me.
Wow.
And that's how you create a different social norm. There's recognition. They have curriculum in the schools, and children are receiving that. Through that curriculum, they're receiving education about healthy versus unhealthy internet use from kindergarten on.
Jeez.
Yeah. So,
wow.
I mean, that's really the solution, is to be comprehensive about it.
Right.
We're in a situation, you up in Canada, me down here in America, we're just in a situation where we're just in our own small way trying to make a difference.
Yes.
But the numbers of people we can impact is very small,
right.
Because
there's only 2 of us.
there are just a few individuals who are really committed to this whole project, and we are 2 of them, but there are others. But until you get a much broader recognition and embracing of there's a problem, and we are here, we're really going to find a solution to the problem, it's going to just be very difficult. Right? I mean,
so tell me what you think of my Screenbuster plan. So my Screenbuster plan is that I train teens through a 5.5-hour online webinar, and they become certified Screenbusters. They're supervised by a teacher who has also completed my certification training, a 3-day course. and that the screen busters then go into all of the classrooms, so the elementary right up through grade 12, once a week for at least 15 minutes. So they visit the classrooms and they have what I term a tech talk, and they might pick up on what they talked about previously. So each teen, say there were, I don't know, say 24 teens trained, in a high school, they would each be responsible for so many different classrooms every week, and it would be part of their curriculum. They get CAP credit and career and personal planning credit. So they go into the classrooms and they would educate the kids on screen usage rates, what's happening to the brain and body, what are the 4 critical factors kids need to grow and succeed. And then they give the challenge to the kids, 24-hour unplugged challenge, and then the kids go home and there would be ongoing education of the parents as well. Do you see that? We started by talking about trend changing, actually shifting the perception of everyone that these screens are actually not all that good for us and they're harmful, and do you see that sort of being a peer-led model?
Yes,
a viable?
I think it's brilliant. And what I think is that it needs to be replicated, right? And I would like to see that model grow and just spread as people recognize that there is some success that comes from it. So you'll need to try to get somebody to figure out how you demonstrate that success. But the model seems appropriate, and I do think the school system is where you have to do this. The school system is the way, I think, to kind of get sort of disseminate this information throughout a country, and as they're doing in Korea with their curriculum and so forth. And so I think it sounds grand.
Has Korea done measurements of success, and what would they use as outcome measures for?
The last time I spoke to somebody from Korea was at the last Children in Screens conference. Actually, the first Children in Screens conference
in California
that was held in Irvine, California. And there was a researcher there. Perhaps you remember his talk. And I don't know if you were with me when I cornered him and had a conversation with him. And he's the one who explained that they had 17 residential treatment facilities set up, and they had trained 2,000 specialists in the treatment of internet addiction that
2,000
that were available around the country in community counseling centers and so forth. And he said that their rates of addiction, so he's a researcher affiliated with one of the universities there, and his research was all on internet addiction. And so he said their rates of addiction, and this was 5 years ago, nationally was at their estimate was 7.5% of the general population. So that's still a lot of people, but it's probably less than it is here. Here, I expect our rates of addiction are higher than that.
What would you say?
Well, there's been inconsistency in how that research is done, and so the outcomes are very wildly.
Right.
But my own guess is that it's probably, depending on what age you're looking at, somewhere between 8 to 12% of the general population would be my guess.
Right.
And that would meet criteria. So their 7.5% is less than that.
Right.
And that's a highly wired country where the potential for addiction is huge.
Right.
So if they have managed to keep a lid on it and keep it down at that level, they're doing a pretty good job, it seems to me.
I have a question I've thought of and I've never asked you. So we have models that are very well established in China, South Korea, some of these other countries that have actually really high performance scores, academic performance scores for their students. So why in North America are we kind of head in the sand on this? Why in both Canada and the US, people are not recognizing addiction, they're not recognizing the negative impact of screens on children. If they were recognizing, I'm sure they would be doing something about it.
Mm-hmm.
But what my experience is that many people are just, I don't know, casting a blind eye to it. Maybe it's because they're addicted themselves and they just can't deal with that. What is your bent on that? Like, why in North America are we so slow to pick up on this gargantuan health epidemic problem?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's such a good question and such a, of course, I don't for sure know what the answer is. My own take on it is that in those Asian countries you've named, they do have there are different cultures and different governments. And the governments have taken the initiative in both South Korea and China. So the governments have been concerned about the effects of screens on their populace, and the governments just said, we're going to take this in hand and do something about it. And they have taken different approaches. There are different kinds of governments. One is a more democratic government, one less so. And of course, China is huge, and South Korea is much smaller in population. So there are differences, but I think what they have in common is a willingness of the government to sort of say, we have a problem and we are going to find, if we can, a solution and back it with resources to address the problem. And we haven't had that kind of recognition here.
By our governments.
By our governments.
Yes.
And our governments, I think, are much more in the thrall of the tech companies themselves because of, I can't speak about Canada, but down here we have lobbying. These tech companies have enormous influence because of their wealth.
Yes.
And so they very much influence the political process, I believe. And so it has really impeded our ability for the government itself to just say, we've got a problem and we're going to put the resources necessary behind it to deal with it. What do you think?
I am just sitting there thinking of this most recent blog post I wrote on corpocracy, which is a term
for corporations.
Corporate, yeah, we've lost democracy now. We have corpocracy by the pharmaceutical corporations, the technology production corporations, the data gathering technology corporations, and because corporate has no conscience, it really doesn't care about kids, and that's a travesty, an absolute utter travesty. I think it is very. It's mind-boggling, really. I wrote an open letter to all of our health and education governments in Canada. So every provincial health and education minister, I wrote a letter to, and I proposed a policy for getting rid of cell phones out of schools, because kids are creating all kinds of issues. They're watching porn, they're playing video games, they're cyberbullying each other, they're on social media, which we know is very detrimental to their
mental and physical health.
Yes, depression, anxiety, self-harm, suicide, all on the rise. And so I wrote this this letter. So I heard back from two of the education ministers in Alberta and in Newfoundland, Labrador. Very positive responses regarding, wow, you know, you should pass this information on to these people. Alberta gave me a database of all the education advocacy groups and principals. Like, I mean, it was like 7,000 people, and whom I contacted, of course. And Newfoundland Labrador basically gave me email addresses of all the director of superintendents, director of principals. So I haven't heard back from my outreach to those two groups, but the other ministers that responded, it was really disheartening. They were form letters, and you know, they basically said, "Oh, well, we've created a committee in our school that makes sure kids know about the dangers of screens." And then the really alarming thing they said is, "We expect the kids to monitor themselves," right? So we have these cell phones that are unrestricted, unsupervised, unmanaged, that are causing tremendous harm, yet whole education governments and schools are completely ignoring all these facts. It just, I don't know, it's disheartening.
It's disheartening. Right.
So back to the kids, that's where I keep going, is I keep thinking, well, okay, we have a whole governments that aren't listening. We have masses of teachers and parents that aren't listening, and clinicians, and everybody's got their head in the sand. It's back to the kids again, right? And putting the burden of climate change, of screen overuse, screen addiction on the kids.
Yeah, which is unfair, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other ideas on where we can move this, right? How can we move this forward? And you and I, we're both in our 60s. Well, you're 70. We're not going to be around forever.
No.
That really worries me. I've only got that much energy left. I don't know about you, but yeah.
So, no, I don't have any other great ideas about what we do in North America. I mean, I'm very interested, as I've told you, I'm very interested to go into other countries that are part of what's now called the Global South. So these are the countries where they're not as resource rich, and technology has not made the same level of inroads in those countries. So a lot of the countries of South America, and Central America, the countries in Asia, South Asia, East Asia, Africa, and all of those are countries where there's an opportunity, if those governments can catch on to what's happening here, and if they can make a decision at this earlier stage of penetration of technology into their country, to manage technology in a healthier way as it does penetrate more and more into the population, they just have a wonderful opportunity to kind of educate their populace and maybe through schools or by whatever means prevent the kind of problems that are now advancing in North America.
Rapidly, yes.
Yeah. So
tell us about, so you just got back from Africa, or
I did,
in the last couple of months. So tell us what you learned from.
What I learned in Kenya, which is where I was, is that there is already a problem. It looks a little different from the problem we have here because it's self-limiting still at this time. It's costly to get a phone, it's costly to gain internet access, and that limits the amount of time that people are are able to spend on the internet. And, there's more like one phone per household. And that, the wealthier households are going to have more phones for more individuals within the household. But so it's still early stages. I mean, this is the prime opportunity. But because the internet is quite costly for the average person, they don't, for instance, have gaming. Video game play is just not a thing.
Wow.
Unless they have enough money to go to, I'm not sure what they're calling it, but like a gaming cafe.
Right.
But there aren't enormous numbers of gaming cafes. There are some. And so there are individuals who are at those gaming cafes and getting addicted. But the level at which there's that particular problem is less. So the way the problem is showing up is less, but social media is just a huge thing. And pornography is really common. So one of the things that was very striking about the situation in Kenya is that young people, even when there's just one phone, let's say in a family, but the young person is still accessing social media on that one phone and being exposed to new ideas, and many of those, and to pornography, and that seems to be leading to earlier and earlier introduction of sexual initiation. And so the problem of HIV/AIDS is going up there. Teenage pregnancy is on the rise, and the age of sexual introduction is
lower
and lower. So, and anybody I spoke to about that agreed that it was tied to the exposure to social media and pornography. So the problems are there, but
not on the scale.
Not on the
that
scale
they are in North America, right?
And so and there were marvelous people that I met who immediately, understood and already were thinking about the problem, and happy to have an opportunity to discuss it and brainstorm, and so these people, are forming a kind of a coalition of with one another to try to see what they can do, and I'm very optimistic that they'll make some headway there.
I think you know this, but I was fascinated when I was contacted by some of the colleagues that you worked with in Kenya to take my webinar series, and I just I don't know. I guess I was just so stunned that they are seeking. They're seeking a high level of research evidence information with which to base their initiatives on, but yet in North America, there's very little interest for this information. I don't understand it. I don't understand it, how we can be so blind to what's going on with our children and be so unable to meet our children's most basic needs for love and attachment, movement, touch, nature. And yet in other countries that are certainly not as wealthy as Canada and the US are moving forward and seeing these issues.
Yeah.
Go figure. I don't know how to understand it.
Nor do I.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Yeah. So what do you think? Shall we see what we've got?